My name is Juniper Holloway and I'm 31 years old. On the second Saturday of June, at my younger sister's engagement party in my parents' backyard, my mother stood up with a champagne flute and a smile I had seen my whole life. It was the smile she wore right before she made me the punchline. I knew before she opened her mouth. You learn that, when you grow up the way I did. You learn the tilt of the head, the little laugh she does when she's pretending she's about to say something sweet. I gripped my own glass tighter and stared at the lemon slice floating in my water and waited. To my Sloan, my mother said, lifting her glass toward my sister, who was glowing under the string lights my father had hung that morning. Who's marrying a doctor, by the way, did everyone hear that? Polite laughter. And to my Juniper, who's 31 and still living above a laundromat painting other people's pets. The laughter that followed wasn't polite, it was the loud, eager kind. The kind where people compete to laugh hardest because they want the host to know they got the joke. My father, sitting 3 chairs down from me, raised his beer and added, "Honey, we love her, but let's be real. We should have put more money into Sloane's college fund and less into Junie's art camp." My sister's fiancé, a man I had met exactly twice before that evening, leaned toward his own father and stage whispered, "Imagine telling people at 31 that you're a painter." His father laughed. His mother laughed. My aunt laughed so hard she had to set down her wine. And then my uncle, who hadn't even bothered to show up to my college graduation 8 years ago, raised his glass and said, "You used to be such a smart little girl. What happened to you?" I remember looking down at my plate. There was a small piece of strawberry cake on it that I hadn't touched. I remember the exact pattern of the napkin. Little blue forget-me-nots. I remember thinking, very calmly, that I had spent my entire life making myself small inside this family, and the only thing I had ever gotten in return was a deeper chair at the bottom of the table. I set my fork down. I picked up my bag from where I'd hung it on the back of my chair. I stood and I looked at each of them, one at a time, because I wanted to remember their faces. My mother, mid-sip, eyes already narrowing because she could tell I wasn't doing what I usually did, which was laugh along and pretend it didn't sting. My father, jaw a little tight, the way he got when a situation was about to embarrass him. My sister, who wouldn't meet my eyes. The fiancé and his family, frozen in that uncomfortable way people freeze when they realize the joke might have a cost. By Labor Day, I said, "Every single one of you is going to be calling me, and I'm not going to pick up." My mother laughed, out loud. So did my father. So did my uncle. My sister rolled her eyes the way she'd been rolling her eyes at me since she was 9 years old. "Oh, Junie, please," my mother called after me as I walked toward the side gate. "Don't be so dramatic. Sit down. It was a joke." I didn't turn around. I didn't slam the gate. I just walked out to my car, got in, and sat there for a full 2 minutes with my hands on the wheel because I couldn't remember how to drive. That's a real thing, by the way. Shock does that. Your body forgets the simplest sequences. I had to talk myself through it. Key in the ignition. Foot on the brake. Shift to reverse. Look in the mirror. Go. Before I tell you what happened over the next 7.5 weeks, and why my phone showed 112 missed calls by the 3rd week of August, do me a favor. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you've ever walked out on a family dinner. I want to know I'm not the only one who's been here. I didn't cry until I was already home. I made it up the back stairs of my apartment building above the laundromat my mother loved to mention. I unlocked my door. I set my bag down on the little table by the window where I kept my paint jars sorted by color. And then I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a teenager. The phone started buzzing within 20 minutes. My mother first, then my father, then my sister, then an aunt I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, who probably wanted to be the hero of the family group chat by talking sense into me. I let the phone vibrate itself across the counter. By the time I'd washed my face, there were 3 voicemails. My mother's was honey sweet and confused, the way she always was when she'd done something wrong and needed me to act like she hadn't. "Junie, sweetheart, please. You know how your mother is. I was just teasing. Don't ruin Sloane's night over a little joke." A little joke. 26 years of little jokes? My father's voicemail was shorter and angrier. You embarrassed your mother in front of your sisters-in-laws. You owe us a phone call. Tonight. My sister's was the worst. It wasn't sorry. It wasn't even angry. It was bored. Wow, Junie. Real mature. Way to make this about you again. I listened to that one twice because some quiet, broken part of me still wanted to believe I was overreacting. That's the thing nobody tells you about being raised by people like mine. They train you so well that even after you finally see them clearly, you don't trust your own eyes. You keep waiting for someone to come along and confirm what you already know. So I didn't call anyone back. I poured myself a glass of water. I sat at the small folding table where I worked, and I opened my laptop and I started writing. Not a reply to them. Not a screed. Just a record. I titled the document, the date, and I wrote down exactly what each of them had said, word for word, while I could still hear it. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to make sure I never gaslit myself into going back. I work as a pet portrait artist. That's the thing my mother loved to translate as painting other people's pets. What I actually do is oil portraits, hand-stretched canvases, commissions that take me anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks each. Mostly for people who've lost their dogs or their horses or their elderly cats and want something on the wall that feels like the animal is still in a room. I built the business over 4 years, slowly, painfully, the way you build anything when you don't have parents who'll co-sign anything for you. I had a waiting list now. I had a small but real reputation in 3 states. I had a kind, patient woman in Charleston who paid me $1,800 to paint her late golden retriever from a single photograph, and who cried on a video call when I showed her the finished piece. To my family, none of that counted. My sister was a pediatric nurse, and she was real. Her fiancé was a doctor, and he was real. I was a 31-year-old woman who lived above a laundromat and painted dogs. That's all they ever saw. The week after the engagement party, the texts kept coming. They got nastier first, then quieter, then strange. By Wednesday, my mother was leaving voicemails that wandered between offended and sorry not sorry. By Friday, my sister sent a long paragraph about how I was manipulating the family by withholding contact. By the following Monday, my father called twice in a row from his work phone, which he never did. I watched the second call go to voicemail and felt nothing. Here's what I think now, looking back. Without me sitting at their table absorbing the comments, the cruelty had nowhere to land. It started to splash on each other. My aunt called my mother and yelled at her for ruining the engagement party. My sister blamed my mother for choosing the wrong moment for her humor. My father blamed my sister for letting the fiancé's family see the family ugly side. My mother, in classic form, called me a fragile little narcissist in a voicemail I saved, because some part of me knew I'd want to listen to it again on a day I was tempted to forgive too easily. I went to work like nothing had happened. I had 3 commissions on the easel. A black lab named Captain, a retired show pony named Glamour, a pair of tabby cats named after Shakespearean characters whose names I could never get right. I painted. I ate cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row because cooking felt like too much. I called my best friend, Callista Briarwood, who I'd known since freshman year of college, and I told her the whole thing. Callista is a labor and delivery nurse, which means she has approximately 0 patience for nonsense and approximately infinite patience for human pain. She listened the entire way through without interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Junie, I want you to hear what you just said out loud. Your mother got up at your sister's engagement party and used a microphone moment to mock her other daughter for sport. That's not a joke. That's a routine. That's been her routine your whole life. The only thing different about this one is that you finally got up from the table." I started crying again. She let me. Then she said the sentence I'd been waiting to hear from someone for 26 years. "You are allowed to stop showing up." That night, I sat down at my laptop and I started a second document. Not a record this time. An essay. I didn't use anyone's name. I called my family the people who raised me, and I called myself the daughter. I wrote about what it's like to grow up knowing your only job at the dinner table is to be the contrast that makes someone else look bright. I wrote about the trained smile. The way you learn to laugh first, before they laugh at you, so it hurts a little less. I wrote about how some families don't yell, they tease. They wink. They turn humiliation into a tradition and pretend that anyone who flinches is the problem. I called the essay The Daughter They Practiced On, and on a quiet Sunday morning I posted it on a small writing site I'd had an anonymous account on for years. I expected nothing. I made tea. I went back to work on Glamour the Pony. By Tuesday, the essay had been shared 4,000 times. By Friday, it was over 20,000. Strangers were leaving comments that made my hands shake. A woman wrote, "I thought I was the only one who learned to laugh at myself before anyone else could." A man wrote, "My older sister was the practiced on." I read this and finally understood why she stopped coming home for Christmas. A grandmother wrote, "If you are the daughter, please know that some of us are sorry. We didn't know how. We're trying to learn now." I sat in my little kitchen and read comments until my tea went cold and the sun moved across the floor. Somewhere in the middle of it, I realized I had spent my entire life thinking I was alone in this. I wasn't. There were thousands of us. There were enough of us to fill a stadium. And every single one of us had been raised to think we were the only one who'd flinched. 2 weeks after the engagement party, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'm so glad I did. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Margot Pemberley, an estate attorney out of Asheville. She represented the estate of my grandmother, Opal Halloway, on my father's side, who had passed away the previous October. Now, here's the part you need to know. My grandmother Opal had been the only adult in my childhood who didn't treat me like a disappointment. She lived 3 hours away in a small house full of plants and watercolors, and from the time I was about 8 years old, she would have me come stay with her for 2 weeks every summer, just the two of us. She taught me to mix colors. She taught me to look at the underside of a leaf before you tried to paint it. She told me, more than once, that she had spent her own life being told she was too soft and too dreamy, and that she had decided somewhere around 40 that those were not insults, they were a description of her good parts. When she died, I had been the only grandchild who flew out for the small private burial she'd requested. My sister had a wedding shower that weekend. My parents claimed they couldn't afford the trip, which was strange, because they'd just bought a new boat. I'd helped my grandmother for years, quietly, with things my parents never knew about. Her old house had a leaking roof in 2019, and I'd paid half the contractor's bill out of my early commission savings. I'd driven down on weekends to help her sort the studio she kept in her attic, full of paintings and sketchbooks going back to the 1960s. She used to say, "Juniper, you're the only one in this family who sees what's actually here." I thought she meant her paintings. I didn't know she meant me. Margot Pemberley told me there was a meeting scheduled for the following Thursday at her office to discuss the disposition of certain assets that had not been included in the initial probate communication to the family. "Your grandmother left a separate instrument," she said carefully, "that names you specifically as the recipient of items she did not wish to pass through the family's general claim. Your parents have been informed of the meeting. I would advise you to attend in person." I sat down on my kitchen floor again. For different reasons this time. The morning of the meeting, I wore the only blazer I owned, the one I'd bought for a gallery opening 2 years ago, and I drove 3 hours south through the mountains to a quiet street in Nashville where Margot's office had a brass nameplate and a fiddly fig in the window. My parents were already in the conference room when I walked in. My father stood up so fast he knocked his coffee. My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It went still. Just still. Margot began. She was kind but efficient, the way good lawyers are. My grandmother, she explained, had executed a separate trust 9 months before her death. Within it, she had placed 2 assets that had been deliberately kept out of the will my parents had already settled. The first asset was my grandmother's house in the mountains, which was paid off and worth, in the current market, around $420,000. The second asset was her studio and its contents, which had been quietly appraised the year before her death by a regional fine arts auction house. There were 137 of her own paintings, plus a small collection of pieces she had bought from other artists in the 70s, including, Margot said carefully, 2 pieces by an artist whose work had appreciated significantly. The total appraised value of the studio contents was somewhere north of $600,000. My father made a noise. I don't know how else to describe it. My mother whispered, "That's impossible." Margot kept talking. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary of both the property and the studio. There were no conditions. There were no obligations to other family members. My grandmother had also, Margot said, left me a letter which she handed across the table in a sealed cream envelope. My father said, his voice tight, "There has to be some discussion about this. Family discussion. That's our mother. That's our inheritance." Margot looked at him with the polite blankness of a woman who has seen this exact scene 1,000 times. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "your mother was extremely specific. The general estate was distributed according to the will you and your siblings already settled. This trust is separate. It is your daughter's. It is not subject to family discussion." My uncle, who I hadn't seen since my grandmother's burial, was on speakerphone. I could hear him breathing. He'd shown up at the burial in a polo shirt and spent the whole afternoon checking his watch. He said, "Junie, sweetheart, come on. Let's be reasonable here." Sweetheart. That word. I had been sweetheart on the way to the bank and a punchline at every dinner table since I was old enough to set my own place. I picked up the envelope and I said very politely, "I'd like to read this in private. Thank you, Margot, for everything." I drove the 3 hours home without crying. I drove the 3 hours home and something else. I drove it in clarity. I made tea when I got back to my apartment. I sat at the little folding table by the window. I opened the envelope. My grandmother's handwriting was the same as it had always been. Loopy. Patient. A little slanted, like she was always tired by the time she got to the end of the page. She wrote that she had watched my parents do to me what her own mother had done to her, and that she had spent 40 years being too tired and too scared to interrupt it. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she had decided, the spring she was diagnosed, that the one thing she could still do was leave me a door that didn't require their permission. She wrote that the house was mine to live in or sell and that she hoped, if I sold it, I would put part of the money into something that mattered to me, but that she was not going to tell me what that should be. Because I had been told what to do by other people my entire life, and it was my turn to choose. The last line of the letter is the one I have framed now on the wall above my easel. "You were not the daughter they practiced on, you were the daughter who survived them. Spend the rest of your life as the second thing, not the first." I cried for a long time. I called Callista. She came over with takeout from the Thai place on the corner, and we sat on my kitchen floor, the way grown women still do sometimes, and we ate pad see ew out of the boxes, and I read her the letter and she cried too. The phone calls from my family started in earnest the next morning. They had clearly held a war council the night before, and a strategy had been agreed upon. My mother's first voicemail of the day was a masterpiece. She wept. She apologized. She used the word we, the way she always did. "We said things we didn't mean. We hurt you. We want to make this right." I had never once in my life heard my mother apologize without using the word we to dilute it. My father's voicemail was practical. He said the family needed to sit down and figure out a fair distribution. He used the word fair 4 times in 90 seconds. He did not use the word sorry once. My sister sent a long text in 3 parts. She told me that my grandmother had clearly been confused at the end and that everyone knows the family should share. She told me that she was getting married in October and that my behavior was ruining the lead up to her wedding. She told me she had always been in my corner, which made me laugh out loud in my kitchen, alone, because in 29 years of being her sister, she had never once been in my corner. Not even by accident. By the end of the week, I had 41 missed calls. By the end of the next week, 86. By the 3rd week, I was at 112. I didn't answer any of them. Then my uncle, the polo shirt uncle, did something interesting. He hired his own attorney and threatened to challenge the trust. Margot called me to tell me, very calmly, that it would go nowhere and to forward any further communication directly to her office. She added, "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. She also knew exactly who she was protecting you from. That trust is bulletproof." In the middle of all of this, my sister did the thing I think she thought was clever. She sent her fiancé to talk to me. He showed up at my apartment building one evening in a button-down shirt and an expression he probably practiced in the car. I didn't let him upstairs. I met him on the sidewalk outside the laundromat, where the smell of dryer sheets was thick in the summer air. He told me he understood I was hurt. He told me families say things they don't mean. He told me my sister was really struggling with the distance between us and that she had always looked up to me, which we both knew was a lie. Then he got to the actual reason he was there. He told me, very gently, like he was breaking bad news, that he and my sister had been pre-approved for a mortgage on a house, contingent on a down payment that the family had been planning to help with. He said the word family 3 times in 2 sentences. He said it would mean the world to my sister if I could see my way to contributing. I let him finish. I waited a long moment. Then I said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to take it back to my sister exactly the way I say it. I am not a bank. I am not a checkbook. I am not the family safety net you all just remembered you have. My grandmother left me what she left me because she watched my parents practice on me my whole life, and she wanted me to have one thing in this world that didn't come with a price tag attached to my dignity. You can tell my sister that the next time she wants to talk to me, she can pick up a phone and do it herself, like an adult, and the conversation will not start with a mortgage." He stood there for a second like he was waiting for me to soften. I didn't. I walked back into my building and up the stairs and locked the door and stood in the middle of my apartment shaking because I had never, ever in my whole life spoken to anyone in my family that way. 2 days later, my sister called. She did not leave a voicemail. She just called 11 times in a row. On the 12th, I answered. I let her get out about 3 sentences. They were the same 3 sentences. Mom is falling apart. The wedding is in October. We just need to be a family. Then I cut her off and I said, "I'm going to ask you one question and I want you to think before you answer it. If Grandma had left that trust to you instead of me, would you have shared a single dollar of it with the family?" There was a long silence on the line. A really long one. Then she said very quietly, "That's not fair." "Answer the question," I said. She didn't. I asked her one more thing. "When Mom stood up at your engagement party and said what she said, did you say anything to her after I left?" Another long silence. Then, "No." "Did anyone?" "No." I said, "Okay. That's all I needed to know." And I hung up. I want to be honest with you. I'm not going to pretend I didn't sit on my kitchen floor again after that. I did. I think I sat there for an hour. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about cutting off your family. Even when they were the wound, they were also the only people who knew your whole life. Walking away from them feels, at first, like erasing yourself. But it isn't. I learned that slowly. It's actually the opposite. It's the first time you've ever been allowed to write yourself down. By the 3rd week of August, the call slowed. By the last week, they stopped almost entirely. I think they realized I wasn't bluffing. I think they realized that the trust was real and bulletproof, and that no amount of pressure was going to crack me open the way pressure used to crack me open when I was 19 and 23 and 28. The week before Labor Day, my mother sent one final text. It said, "You are breaking this family apart. I hope you can live with what you've done." I read it twice. I made myself a cup of tea. And I texted back, for the first and only time in those 7 weeks. I wrote, "You broke this family apart the day you decided one of your daughters was the entertainment. I just stopped pretending I didn't notice." Then I blocked her number. I want to tell you what I did with the trust, because I think it matters. I sold my grandmother's house to a young family with 2 kids and a beagle. They cried at the closing because they hadn't thought they could afford a place with a yard. The studio I kept. I had every painting professionally photographed and archived, and I'm slowly placing them, one at a time, with galleries and private collectors who actually knew my grandmother's work. I'm not going to sell them all. I'm keeping the watercolors she did the summer I was 11, when she taught me how to paint shadows on water. With part of the sale of the house, I bought the building I used to live above. The laundromat is still there. The owner of the laundromat is still there. I just own the building now, and my apartment is paid off, and the rent from the other 3 units pays my expenses. I converted the attic into a real studio with the kind of north-facing windows you spend your whole life as an artist daydreaming about. With another part of it, I started a small fund in my grandmother's name. It pays for art supplies and 1 summer studio month for women over 50 who never got to use the gift they were told was foolish when they were young. I have 4 women in the program this year. One of them is a retired postal worker who paints landscapes from photographs she took in the 70s. She sent me a card last month that said, "I didn't know it wasn't too late." That card is also on the wall above my easel, next to my grandmother's letter. I didn't go to my sister's wedding in October. I sent a card. I wished her well. I meant it mostly. I haven't spoken to my mother or father since the text. I hear through a cousin who reached out cautiously over the summer that my mother tells people I had a breakdown and cut off the family for no reason. I hear my father has stopped correcting her when she says it. I hear my sister is pregnant. I hope the baby is loved out loud in a way I wasn't. I hope, more than anything, that my sister learns the difference between teasing and practicing. I hope her child is never the daughter they practice on. It's been almost a year since the engagement party now. I'm still painting. I have a 6-month waiting list. I have a small show coming up at a gallery in Savannah this fall. My first solo, all portraits of people's lost animals. The gallery owner wants to call it Beloved. I think I'll let her. I want to tell you the last thing my grandmother wrote in her letter, the part I didn't read out loud to Callista that night, the part I keep just for me. She wrote, "Juniper, when you were 6 years old, you painted me a picture of a fox. You couldn't get the tail right and you cried, and your mother told you that you weren't a real artist because real artists don't cry over their work. I want you to know that every real artist I ever met cried over their work, and the ones who didn't were the fakers. You are not the faker, my love. You never were. So here's the thing I want to leave you with. If your family is the kind that turns one of you into a joke and then calls you difficult for not laughing, you are allowed to get up from the table. You are allowed to stop answering the phone. You are allowed to choose the version of yourself that survives them over the version of yourself that pleases them. You are not breaking anything. You are putting yourself back together. Tell me in the comments. Would you have answered the calls, or would you have done what I did? And to the daughter they practiced on, wherever you are watching this from, I see you. I am you. We are not alone. I've been turning this whole thing over in my head for almost a year now, and the part that still stops me cold is how predictable it all was. Not the inheritance, not the trust, the way my family behaved. My mother didn't change because she got older. My father didn't change because his daughter walked out. They behaved exactly the way they had behaved my whole life, and the only thing that shifted was me. That's the part I want anyone watching this to really sit with. People who have been treating you a certain way for 30 years will not wake up one morning and decide to be different. They will only adjust when staying the same starts to cost them something, and that's not a cynical thing to say. That's just cause and effect. It's the same law that governs everything else in a life. What you tolerate, you teach. What you reward, you get more of. I had spent 26 years rewarding my mother's cruelty by sitting through it, and so she kept serving it. The moment I stopped showing up to absorb it, the entire arrangement collapsed. The thing I had to learn, the hard way, the slow way, was that protecting my own dignity wasn't the same as picking a fight. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even really about them. It was about whether I was going to keep volunteering for a role that nobody had ever actually asked my permission to cast me in. My grandmother Opal saw that before I did. She used her last clear-eyed year to build me a door. Not because she wanted me to be rich, but because she wanted me to have one decision in my life that didn't come with a tax of my own self-respect. That's the difference between a gift and an inheritance, I think. A gift makes you grateful. An inheritance, the real kind, makes you free. If there is anything I would say to anyone listening who recognizes themselves in this, it's three quiet things. Be honest, even when honesty costs you the room. Be smart enough to notice the pattern before the pattern names you. And be tough enough to walk out of the kitchen the first time, not the 50th time. Because every time you stay is another year of training them that you will. None of that is cold. None of that is mean. It's the same backbone Opal tried to build in me from the time I was 8 years old, mixing watercolors at her kitchen table. She used to tell me that being soft and being weak were not the same word, and that the people who taught me they were would never apologize for the lesson. She was right about that too. My mother has not apologized, she probably never will, and somehow that has stopped mattering. Because the apology I needed was never going to come from her. It was going to come from me to the 6-year-old girl who once cried over a fox painting she couldn't get right. I'm still painting. I'm still here. That's the apology, and it's enough.